We all know the physical sensation of receiving a harsh insult. Your chest gets heavy, your mind races, and you get that sinking feeling of the world suddenly collapsing inwards. The cruelty plunges in, and the pain feels entirely overwhelming. Our default human instinct in these moments is outward. We desperately want to control the external environment, correct the record, and force the other person to take their words back. The problem is that attempting to dictate how other people treat us is an unwinnable game. It requires endless mental labor and guarantees permanent psychological exhaustion. There is an old story about an angry traveler who was given a bowl of salt by a wise woman. She tells him to stir a heavy handful of the salt into a tiny cup of drinking water. He takes a sip, gags, and declares the water intensely bitter and entirely undrinkable. Think of this dynamic as a simple equation, the dilution principle. Emotional toxicity equals the insult received divided by your internal volume. If you cannot reduce the top number, the cruelty thrown at you, the mathematical way to peace is expanding your internal volume. How do you actually expand that internal capacity? The first step requires you to do something counterintuitive. You deliberately narrow your immediate focus to freeze out the external noise. Consider the story of Marco. He was tasked with carrying a glass of water, filled to the brim, straight through a chaotic, noisy village. Marco had to track his own balance with intense, absolute concentration. Because he was entirely consumed by the fragile state of the water in his hands, he walked right through the square, without even hearing the stray dogs barking or the villagers shouting at him. When you anchor your attention strictly to your own immediate journey and the tasks right in front of you, you exhaust your available cognitive space. There is literally no mental bandwidth left over to process the judgments of bystanders. Absolute presence acts as a firewall. It effectively starves external cruelty of the attention it requires to survive in your mind. Even with strong focus, insults can occasionally slip through. External cruelty usually finds traction because it targets the leaks in our psychological container, our hidden insecurities, and the private fears that we are somehow broken. There is a parable of an old clay pot that felt deep shame because it constantly leaked water through a large crack in its side. It sat in silence while the flawless, seamless pots nearby openly mocked its uselessness. But the story completely shifts when the leaking pot finally looks back at the long path it had been traveling. All of that leaking water had secretly been nurturing a long, beautiful trail of flowers in the dirt, a trail the flawless pots could never have created. When you proactively reframe your perceived flaws as unique strengths, you neutralize the internal shame. You patch the very leaks that critics are trying to exploit. Strip away the shame and you strip the insult of its leverage, leaving your emotional resilience completely intact. Let's return to the wise woman and the angry traveler. They leave the tiny, bitter cup of water on the table and walk until they reach the shores of a massive body of water. The woman takes the exact same handful of harsh, coarse salt and throws it straight into the deep lake. She hands the traveler a fresh cup, dips it into the lake, and asks him to drink. The water remains perfectly sweet. Actively choosing positive thoughts and practicing gratitude, especially in moments where you receive zero external praise, acts as the steady flow of fresh water that fills your internal lake. Simple acts of kindness toward others deepen that basin further. You construct a mental landscape so vast that a handful of insults cannot possibly alter its chemistry. A massive internal world absorbs minor toxicities effortlessly. The cruelty of others is rendered mathematically insignificant to your overall well-being. Maintaining a small, reactive mind carries an ultimate cost. It drains our most finite, non-renewable resource, time. Every single second you spend ruminating over someone else's cruel behavior is a second permanently deleted from your lifespan. You can never buy it back. You will never have control over the salt the rest of the world decides to throw into your life, but you do possess absolute, uncompromising control over the depth and vastness of your own internal waters. An ocean does not panic at a handful of salt. It simply absorbs it, dilutes it to nothing, and remains unshakably calm.